He said it more strongly earlier today. He said he hated me when he first encountered my work because it was just too long. I would very much like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this wonderful conference. It really is a wonderful conference. It's, and how could it not be? I mean, it's all about love, and it's organized by people who love Jesus and love the church and love John Paul II, love Poland, and now we love each other, so it's not a bad couple days, I'd say. I'd also like to thank the translators for the wonderful work that you've been doing. Thank you. Mine might be a bit of a challenge. As I proofread it, there's a few little gaps here, but I'm sure you can fill them in. St. Pope John Paul II found his time preparing young people for marriage a very satisfying period of his life, a time in which he learned much about love and taught much about love. His book, Love and Responsibility, is surely a fruit of his experiences with young people and married couples. Wojtyła identifies the purpose of love and responsibility as being a deliberation on how to transform eros, or the sexual urge, into agape. In other words, on how to transform the tendency to use a person of the opposite sex into the ability to make a gift of oneself to another. He has a keen sense of the truth that we are bundles of hormones and desires that all too easily drive us to see and treat others as objects meant to satisfy our desires. Helping one's children find a good spouse is one of the most important tasks of parenting. We all know that a strong marriage is invaluable, that those who are happily married find greater success in navigating the challenges of life, whereas unhappy and broken marriages make facing the challenges of life all that more difficult. Parents would be greatly assisted by knowledge of the content of love and responsibility. It is, however, a dense and challenging work and involves profound philosophical, psychological, and ethical analysis. Nonetheless, the truths set forth in Love and Responsibility can provide much practical guidance for educating oneself, one's children, and others on what true love is and how to find a good spouse. My aim here is to draw out some of that practical guidance. For those who find the original text of Love and Responsibility too challenging, there's also popularizing texts, such as Edward Shree's Men, Women, and the Mystery of Love. Much helpful guidance can also be found in the superb document, The Truth and Meaning of Human Sexuality, published in 1995 by the Pontifical Council for the Family. It is clearly based on Wojtyła's work. It provides practical advice on how to form one's child in chastity, an essential component to the proper use of one's sexuality. Am I going slowly enough, translator? It's okay? Thank you. Okay. Wojtyła's Love and Responsibility speaks of parents educating children and of man and woman educating each other. He also speaks of educating love itself and of educating the feelings that are integral to love, such as fondness, sympathy, goodwill, shame, and tenderness. Wojtyła speaks of all these feelings as elements of love. He speaks of how these elements must be educated in order to be absorbed into love, to be able to support and not to compete with true love. For convenience sake, I will speak of these elements of love as stages of falling in love. What is especially important is that Wojtyła identifies the various dangers that accompany each stage. Dangers that can be summarized as becoming so entangled in one's own feelings that one uses rather than respects the person to whom one is attracted, and thus never achieves true love. Briefly, the stages begin with being drawn to a person of the opposite sex due to values that one discerns in the other, possibly psychological characteristics or sexual attraction, he calls fondness. And these are what Wojtyła calls, I love this phrase, the raw material of love. When being drawn to another is more than a passing interest, one may develop the desire to possess the other, one who perceives as being a good for oneself. This can happen without much knowledge of the other and can be experienced largely as a self-centered experience. Both males and females are inclined to retreat into the world of subjectivity. The male focuses on the sensual aspects of attraction, the female on sentimentality, or the emotional charges she gets from the attraction. Unless the attraction becomes mutual, of course, love cannot issue from these attractions. Should the attraction become reciprocal, to avoid having the relationship devolve into mutually using each other, there is a need for sympathy to arise, or sharing the feelings of another, which in turn must morph into friendship or the desire for the good of the other. The physical affection that occurs during this growth should be the affection of tenderness, which should be as free as possible from a sexual charge, although it's nearly impossible to limit affection to simply conveyance of loving concern until one learns how to be chaste. The previous paragraph or analysis is a condensation of probably more than 100 pages of love and responsibility, and thus, of course, is a very inadequate treatment of Wojtyła's discussion. But it suggests the depth and precision of his analysis of love and should help those seeking a spouse or those guiding young people through the turbulent waters of sexual and romantic attraction. Wojtyła rightly believes it would be very, very beneficial for all pursuing love to be conscious of different feelings that arise, especially the feelings that could derail one from achieving the integration of them into a mature love. Parents need to help their children learn to identify these feelings and to determine if they are allowing them to override the respect they should have for the other person. As male children become aware of the powerful physical appeal females have for them, they can be challenged to consider whether they are attracted only to the sexual features of a female or are also attentive to her character. When female children become enamored of a male, they need also to be taught not to get lost in romantic reveries, but to assess the ability of the young man to be self-giving and protective rather than predatory. There are countless gems in love and responsibility. Among the several that I find particularly useful for awakening those desires of love to the reality and complexities of true love is that of the difference that I've spoken of between using another and loving another, which Wojtyła makes at the beginning of the book. Wojtyła teaches that the sexual urge, left undisciplined, leads people to use each other. There's a true brilliance in this distinction. Most everyone intuitively recognizes the wrongness of using another, especially when they have some rudimentary understanding of the principle, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or as often phrased by parents to a child who has treated another badly, Would you like it if someone did that to you? Much of the drama surrounding adolescent romantic relationships, if they can be called that, is the reported phenomena of betrayal by a boyfriend or girlfriend. The relationship may have amounted only to exchanging a few texts or sitting beside each other at lunch, but when the boyfriend or girlfriend talks to another person of the opposite sex in the hallway, they are accused of betrayal. Even quite young people hate to be used, especially in the realm of romance. As a phenomenologist, and as one who knows that grasping truth is significantly assisted by being rooted in experience of reality, which will sometimes best be indirect experience, Wojtyła would likely approve of parents trying to get their children to reflect upon how they feel when they have been used. If the children themselves have the good fortune of not having been subjected to hurtful betrayal, a good technique is to expose a child to stories, perhaps in a novel or a film, that portrays someone who gets hurt by being used by another. There are other means of helping people understand the difference between using and loving. In a world where the existence of truth is denied, and the human person is often valued only for his or her utility, parents should regularly try to help their children recognize obvious, self-evident, foundational truths, such as the difference between things and persons. I remember a colleague of mine having an apple as a snack in the presence of some students. As he bit into the apple, he remarked that this was a very lucky apple, since it was achieving the highest telos available to its nature, because it was being consumed by a rational creature. He drove home his point by also claiming that the turkey that is the main course of a Thanksgiving meal is a much luckier turkey than one that lives out his life in the wilderness. Again, because the turkey is being absorbed into the life of a rational creature. At one time, the truth that material things exist to be in service of spiritual entities was more or less a truth that did not need to be articulated, but now is altogether controversial and provocative. I've had students object to that story, that it's not better for the apple to be eaten. It would be better for it to drop on the ground and just die. Anyway, or maybe a gilded apple and put on a bookshelf. Anyway, parents will need to invite their children to come up with examples of how things that are mere instruments, no matter how highly valued, can be discarded when no longer useful. Whereas human beings have an intrinsic value and thus must be treasured and never discarded, no matter how worn out and useless. For again, human beings are not to be valued for their usefulness, are not to be valued as means to other ends or the ends of others, but for their very being, which Wojtyła likes to speak of in Kantian terms, as ends in themselves. In Love and Responsibility, Wojtyła speaks about the truth of the rightness of recognizing persons as entities that cannot be used as being elementary and the foundational exponent of the natural moral world. Wojtyła justifies this principle that perhaps should be self-evident by pointing out that only human beings are persons. Only human beings have freedom, which enables us to choose which ends we want to pursue. We are not here to satisfy the needs and desires of others. Wojtyła states, every person is by nature capable of determining his or her aims. Anyone who treats a person as a means to an end does violence to the very essence of the other, to what constitutes its natural right. Since our culture often considers morality largely in terms of rights, it might make some sense to young people to learn that people have a natural right to be treated in accord with their natural dignity and should be allowed to make free choices about their own destiny. Wojtyła maintains that the only proper response to a free creature is love, and articulates the personalistic principle as the person is a kind of good to which only love constitutes the proper and fully mature relation, because the value of love is always higher than the value of pleasure. It is a matter of justice to respond to the human person with love, which is, simply stated, seeking the good of the other rather than using the other. Another apt phrase that Wojtyła uses is that of speaking of the initial attraction to the other person as the raw material of love. I love this phrase, material that he warns can be squandered if not properly put in the service of true love. These phrases resonate with young people who these days are so quick to engage in sexual intimacy. Indeed, often before they know each other's last names. Sometimes promising relationships go nowhere because intimacy begins prematurely and makes getting to know the other difficult, if not impossible. A movie, The Dating Project, depicts young people learning how to date each other rather than just to hook up sexually with another. They're given an assignment that they have to ask someone out for a date rather than just get drunk and have sex. One young man spoke of having a young woman respond favorably to his invitation to meet with her, much more satisfying than the hasty sexual hookups he had experienced previously. Modern practices of male-female relationships are based upon the notion that sexual relationships are essentially for the purposes of getting one's own sexual desires satisfied. Young people are often surprised to hear that God's plan for sexuality is that it is to be used in service of making a complete gift of oneself to another. They have no idea about sex being a gift. It seems like it's all about me. Really, it's supposed to be I thought it was just a mutual exchange. I get what I want, he gets what he wants. But it's a gift that can only be made in the context of marriage, right? It is a novel concept to them. Those who want to develop the raw material of the sexual urge into agapic or self-giving love must be conscious of two truths. One we have discussed. They need to understand that the person who is the object of one's desire is a person who should not be used, but rather is someone who deserves to be loved. The second key truth in Wojtyła's analysis is his very rich understanding of what he calls conscious parenthood, very peculiar phrase, which essentially means that one needs to be conscious that the purpose of marriage is to raise up children for God, and thus an indispensable characteristic that a potential spouse should possess is the suitability of undertaking the task of parenting. Indeed, it is this awareness that Wojtyła says raises sexual intercourse to the level of the person. He says, when a man and woman capable of procreation have intercourse, their union must be accompanied by awareness and willing acceptance of the possibility that I may become a father or I may become a mother. Sexual union is raised to the level of the person only when it is accompanied in the mind and the will by accepting the possibility of parenthood. This acceptance is so important, so decisive, that without it, marital intercourse cannot be said to be a realization of a personal relationship. Neither in the man nor in the woman can affirmation of the value of the person be divorced from awareness and willing acceptance that he may become a father and she may become a mother. If the possibility of parenthood is deliberately excluded from marital relations, the character of the relationship automatically changes away from unification in love and in the direction of mutual, or rather bilateral, enjoyment. End of passage. The somewhat strange phrase, conscious parenthood, captures a truth that should be obvious, but has fallen out of common consciousness. This is the truth that sex leads to babies, or in Wojtyła's more precise expression, sex leads to parenthood. This is a fundamental concept our culture has forgotten. Sex leads to parenthood. Thus, those who engage in sex should be prepared to be parents. Therefore, one who has been struck by sexual desire for another and is inclined to pursue the object of attraction needs to keep asking him or herself, both, am I seeking the good of the other who should not be used, and also, am I willing to be a parent with this person to whom I am attracted? Or are we ready to be parents together? Again, our culture seems to have almost forgotten the truth that sex leads to babies, indeed to parenthood. The ubiquity of contraception, pornography, and casual hookups have led people to deny that procreation is a fundamental purpose of sex, and that being responsible means that one is prepared for the possibility that a new human being may result from sexual intercourse. Rather, in our culture, being sexually responsible now means that one uses what one believes to be an effective contraceptive. For more than a half century, our culture, convinced that the world is overpopulated, has looked upon each child conceived as a threat to humanity, or rather, to the climate. Thankfully, the growing awareness that we are in a demographic implosion has led some governments to see that reproducing another member of the human species contributes to the common good, and thus they have developed pronatal policies. Contraceptive sex has become the usual form of sex directed largely to mutual pleasure and largely without responsibility. Should a pregnancy occur, despite the use of contraception, the pregnancy is considered to be an accident and something for which one has no responsibility. Abortion deals with the unfortunate accident. Sex and babies are not seen as intrinsically related, and insofar as they are, it's considered to be a most unfortunate alliance. The decision to have sex is rarely tied to the decision to have a child, and rarely discussed as a possibility before a couple engages in sex. Deciding not to use contraception and to be open to children is understood to introduce a new and optional element into sex. Indeed, many spouses do not talk about having children until years into the marriage, whereupon they sometimes find they have very different expectations in this regard, a conflict that is not easily resolved and sometimes leads to divorce. An important element of parenthood that escapes many is beautifully captured in Wojtyła's reference to parents as co-creators with God. Human beings are the highest of all creatures. It is our immortal souls which give us infinite value. It is not possible, though, for male and female human beings to conceive a new human life without direct intervention by God himself, for only God can create an immortal soul. Thus, Wojtyła and the Church speak about parents being cooperators with God and co-creators with God, but absolutely dependent upon God in the conception of new human beings. Gaudium et Spes states, "We wish to emphasize that God himself is present in human fatherhood and motherhood quite differently than he is present in all other instances of begetting on earth. Indeed, God alone is the source of that image and likeness which is proper to the human being as it was received at creation. Begetting is the continuation of creation." Many spouses are not aware of this dimension of their sexual acts, that when engaging in sexual acts, they are, in essence, inviting God to create a new human soul. When contracepting, they are conveying to God that they wish to enjoy a great pleasure with each other, but wish to deny him the opportunity to create new life, a possibility he wrote into the very nature of the sexual act. While most people may not realize the profound connection between sex, God, and babies, it should be natural for human beings to know that sex leads to babies. In our culture, biological realities are not seen as realities to be respected, but as challenges to overcome, as challenges to science, to find means to mold whatever exists to be in service of fulfilling whatever desires we might have. So far as I know, no one predicted the insane phenomenon of transgenderism, but it is the logical consequence of the acceptance of contraception. Biology should define nothing. Science should find a way to overcome the apparent limitations of the material and biological worlds. We, not God, are sovereign over the universe. It is important for parents to be very cognizant that our world teaches the absolute opposite of what common sense, sound reasoning, science, and Christian revelation understands to be the truth about sex. Parents must be prepared to find a myriad of ways to instruct their children on the manifest fact that sex leads to babies, that God loves babies and participates in their conception, and that sex, love, marriage, and babies are naturally a package deal. Grzegorz Ignatyk, in his translation of Love and Responsibility, provides an explanatory note about the Polish word used for education in many of the passages of love and responsibility. He tells us that these words carry the meaning of, quote, an integral formation or cultivation of the whole person with full respect for his dignity, which Wojtyła speaks of as creativity. Parents are to create a culture within the home that teaches their children the truths about God, the human person, and sexuality. In Love and Responsibility, Wojtyła does not specify what means might be taken to do so, perhaps because the means will undoubtedly be different in different places and times. Nonetheless, a part of culture everywhere is the example of the tender, committed, loving relationship of the parents. Spouses who show respectful, committed, understanding, forgiving love to their spouses are doing the first and foremost thing necessary to educate their children well. As mentioned above, movies, TV shows, and novels might provide suitable occasions for discussion of the various experiences people have when affected by sexual attraction. Rather than lecturing their children, parents may find children learn more when they are challenged to analyze what the characters in a film, show, or novel experience. Parents can guide their children to choose good friends and to observe the healthy and unhealthy relationships of others. Even before children begin to show much interest in the opposite sex, it would be good to point out to them which boys and girls show signs that they will be good parents. Say you'll want to marry someone like that someday, such as those who are kind and helpful to their younger brothers and sisters and to other young children. It's also nice to combine this with compliments to your spouse. Your father is such a wonderful father. You're going to want to marry someone like him. Your mother is such a wonderful mother. She cares for us in so many ways. You're going to want to marry someone just like her. Did you notice this little girl over here? It's a lot like that. God has made the human heart such that most people very much want to be good parents to their children, which thankfully arrive as adorable, vulnerable babies, rather than challenging and sometimes off-putting teenagers. Parents need to introduce their children to the joy of caring for babies when their children are quite young. Young people love babies, and they should be put in the presence of babies a lot. Children will gain firsthand experience in how precious babies are, and will come to understand that the all-absorbing care babies need is best done in a two-parent household. Wojtyła wisely recommends that it's necessary to test love thoroughly before it is declared to another, and especially before one considers it's one's vocation and starts building one's life on it. Testing one's love before it is declared to another could save a lot of hearts from being broken and or prevent some bad marriages. By testing love, Wojtyła means that those who believe they are experiencing true love need to examine the basis for and the promise of that love. Specifically, it is necessary to test what is in each of the persons co-creating this love, and consequently, as he says, what is between them. It must be established what their reciprocity is based upon, and whether or not it is merely an appearance of reciprocity. One powerful way of testing what those who think they are in love are truly experiencing is to establish that the couple will not engage in sexual intercourse until they are married. It should be a non-negotiable, a deal breaker, not only because sex outside of marriage is a mortal sin, not only because risking a pregnancy threatens to do one's future offspring serious harm, as well as the persons involved, but because it is very difficult to be objective about the nature of one's love if the element of consummated sexual pleasure is involved. Driving home at night to sleep alone in one's own bed is a rich time for reviewing the precise nature of one's romantic attraction. Another word Wojtyła frequently uses in Love and Responsibility is the word affirmation. He uses it most frequently in insisting upon recognizing that the other person is a person with infinite value, again, and is by nature free and thus not ought to be used. Affirmation is an attitude essential to the virtue of chastity, for one cannot affirm another without the virtue of chastity. The sexual desires are simply too powerful and will overtake one's will unless one treasures the other and actively and sincerely never wants to harm the other. Again, parents must cultivate, especially within their sons, an attitude of protectiveness towards women, a determination that they do not allow other males to use females, and certainly that they themselves would never use a female. All the more so that they should never harm a female towards whom they think they feel love. While Wojtyła speaks emphatically about the necessity of affirming all persons, he makes it clear that there is a particular way that a lover affirms the beloved. The lover must seek the good of the other, and since spousal love is reciprocal, they must seek a common good. The common good, intrinsic to the spousal relationship, is the project of being parents together. What higher compliment can one person make to another than to say one wishes to be the parent of children with another? One wishes to be party to bringing into existence another person with the beloved's eyes, laugh, and walk, for instance, that one is willing to undertake the absorbing and lifetime task with another to raise up children for the Lord. It is a great consolation for parents and for those seeking spouses that they are not on their own. God has a great investment in wanting marriages to work, since he created the whole universe so that souls could spend eternity with him. Wojtyła explains that God is intimately involved in the shaping of human love. He says, what God gives in the supernatural order, in the order of grace, also belongs to the whole of this material. For he does not leave the work of education, which is in a sense a continuous creation of personhood, entirely and exclusively to parents. But he himself, God, personally takes part in it as well. Not only did the love of the parents stand at the beginning of the new human person, as they were only co-creators, but the Creator's love decided about a person's coming to be in the womb of the mother. Grace is, so to speak, the further continuation of this work. God himself takes the highest part in the creation of human personhood in the spiritual, moral, and strictly supernatural sphere. And parents, if they are not to forgo their proper role, the role of co-creators, also should help in this. End of passage. In the end, of course, God is in charge. God is pure love and wants to incorporate us into that love. Being parents and helping others to become good parents, which is greatly aided by helping them find good spouses, is one highly effective way God transforms us from selfish individuals prone to use others to self-giving persons intent on loving others. Thank you.